almost, it looked like it was Monday. I don't know what it was. It was a flying saucer or what it was. It wasn't an airplane. It was not an airplane. It was down awfully low.
You're listening to Pursuit of the Paranormal Podcast with your hosts, Ash Ellis and Greg Tomlinson.
How are we doing?
Very well. Down your neck of the woods, kind of, right now.
You are indeed. You are indeed.
In London town.
How have you been? It's not really a town though, is it? But it is London town. How are you finding it?
It's horrible. Left the pub and it said 1.9 miles to the hotel, well, to where I'm staying from there. And it took an hour to drive there. It's 2 miles. So, yeah, it's London. It's crazy busy. I'm glad to be out of here in a few days.
Yeah, don't blame you. Don't blame you.
Don't know how you lot do it. It's too busy. Busy.
It's not like that around where I am. So
I'll be there Saturday, so he'll show me.
Yeah, and you'll see it's calm and tranquil compared to London, especially up Whitehorse Hill at midnight, where I was with Sarah. So it's yeah, you'll see the difference between London and Oxford, for definite.
Hopefully.
Cool. So we are having a round table today. UAP
it's been a while
table.
since we've had a UFO round table.
Yeah, it has. It has. I can't even remember the last one. It must have been before Christmas, was it?
December.
Yeah.
There we go.
And that was the ghost of
Christmas past.
So that was, you probably recognise the voice if you listen to our previous episodes with Dave and previous roundtables with Dave Smethurst. Welcome back to the show, Dave.
Yeah, how are you doing, lads? Sorry, I broke the fourth wall a bit there, didn't I? I do apologise. Yeah, good to be back. I remember listening to the December roundtable because I'd done something with you in November, going through where we were. And then you guys did it. I thought it was really good, the roundtable in December. So I think it's quite topical now to do it in March to see where we are. So I think it'd be quite interesting.
Well, the December one was intended to be a paranormal roundtable.
That's right. Sorry.
Andy on. I think because all the drone stuff was happening, it kind of turned into a drone roundtable, effectively. But yeah, the guy from that episode is back with us as well. Chris from the Scottish Paranormal Podcast. Welcome back, Chris.
Hi, folks. Hi, guys. Hope you're all well.
Very well.
Yeah, all good here.
Well, I was very impressed with last time, Chris, when I heard you. So let's hope it's the same this time, shall we?
Could you understand me?
Oh, very much so.
I usually get some grief on my own podcast, but I can't understand that guy at a Scottish Paranormal Podcast.
Yeah.
I need to learn to speak slower and clearer.
Well, my enunciation isn't too good, old boy, so.
It's fine. It's all good. So I guess with this month's, like I say, it's sort of March, we're kind of quite away through the year. So we kind of recap where we left off 2024 and the developments that we sort of had since then, I guess is the best way to approach this.
Yeah. Should we kick off then? I've got a couple of things if you want. Oh, is that all right? And we can dive in. Is that okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. Okay, so I think the title might be this epoch, this quarter, as it were, Publish and Be Damned, because everybody's sort of sick of nobody saying anything really. So the overarching theme is we haven't seen the progress we thought, but we would be seeing after Christmas. We're all expecting something to happen, and it sort of hasn't happened really. So we're not quite sure what's going to happen next. The other big thing, there's been a bigger focus on psionic sort of stuff, consciousness. Other themes have started to come out more, which is linked to the sort of experiencer side of things. But also that's come to the fore in a way. But the big story is that, like everything else, sort of Trump seems to have changed everything, really, because if you remember when I was on November, I was saying, because he was about expose the deep state, whether you believe that or not, one side byproduct of that would have been that he might have smashed the UFO secrecy sort of cabal, as it were. So we'll get onto that and what's happened there, but that's also going on. Just a little bit more, and I'll let you guys get a word in edgeways. So we saw drone activity in January, quite a big surge there again, which a lot of big figures in ufology were saying something big is coming. There was a few whistleblowers, some weird, some not so weird. Your mate Jeremy Corbell had a big hissy fit about the November hearings. You may or may not remember. We can talk about that if you want. A bit childish, in my opinion. We heard that an FBI had set up a working group, and as I say, there was big high hopes for Trump declassifying, and then a fella called Jake Barber come out, which we'll maybe talk about next. But anyway, that was where I sort of was. It was all expectation in January, and then Trump arrived. So I don't know what your guys' perceptions were.
Well, I think. Well, sorry, I'll just jump in, guys. All right. I think obviously when you were hearing that there was something going to drop in January, I think that was the kind of Barber story. You know what I mean? When you had Ross Coulthart and there was some whistleblowers going to drop, and other people were saying that as well, and then the Barber story came out. You know what I mean? So there's loads to the Barber story to get into. With that, you know what I mean? And we can delve into that as we kind of go through it, and I think we'll probably come back and forth with that. You know what I mean? There's just loads to it. You know what I mean, in regards to what they're trying to do, basically trying to obviously get it to the forefront and stuff like that, apparently, you know what I mean, but it is going to be funded by venture capitalists as well, so they say. What's the name of the group that Jake Barber's got, the company?
Skywatcher,
that's it, yeah, Skywatcher. So, I mean, there's a lot in it. I mean, the thing that kind of caught me to start off with the kind of the Barber story and the Psionics. So obviously the Barber story came out, him being working in a crash retrieval team with a few other different people. Then the story came out about the Psionics, where people were basically either meditating or remote viewing and basically bringing craft in. And baiting craft along with other electronic devices that they've got, which probably Ross Coulthart called a dog whistle. There's a different name for them now. It's an electronic, some type of electronic asset they talked about. I mean, which it's a signal or whatever else, and it's supposed to be bringing UFOs in or whatever else is in. And then one of the kind of more recent things he was talking about as well, they've got a definition of a lot of different craft that they actually have visually seen and recorded, stuff from nuts and bolts craft to like orb type things to jellyfish creatures, loads of different stuff. I mean, and that's going to be in the up and coming shows that they're going to put out or up and coming releases and stuff like that. But going back to the start of the Barber story, one of the things that intrigued me quite a lot, the most, was obviously the psionic part of it. And there was one bit that was mentioned, I don't know if he's picked up on it or not. I spoke to Ash about this the other week there, and it was when he was doing the interview with Ross Coulthart. He went through the kind of all the basics of it and talked about the story getting out there, then talked about psionics, and then had the interview with Jesse Michaels, and he talked about in that basically about the whole kind of Michael Herrera story. The Michael Herrera story was when he kind of seen a link in there. The Michael Herrera was a whistleblower that came to Greer, basically seen that octagon-shaped craft in the forest or the jungle when they were on a humanitarian mission with the US Marines. And he said there was like a black ops group that basically were around this craft and they were putting boxes onto the craft. So Jake Barber had went to Greer when he heard that story, and basically, and they were trying to actually suss out people who were trying to whistleblow at that time. And then they said they knew what the boxes were, and the boxes were they were the ones that actually brought that thing about the boxes for actually for transporting humans, rather than, I think Herrera thought it was like drug smuggling or something like that. And he'd said he knew teams like that, which is quite mad, right? I mean, anyway, but the story goes that this kind of story went on from just that to being they were probably transporting psionic assets coming from a third world country because it was like some type of storm or something like that, or some type of kind of catastrophe, and they were getting them out of Dodge. And I couldn't get that whole kind of aspect of the story in my head. Why not just bust them out? I mean, why do you need to get a UFO coming in there with a black ops team to put humans in boxes to then cart them back to the US to work as psionic assets? It just seems totally crazy, right? There's maybe a understanding here or whatever else, but I found that part of it quite mad. And then another part of it is when he talked about kids being more susceptible to having the abilities, which quite a lot of like people in this field know. When you're in the paranormal field, you know that kids have got like a bit more sensibility to things, and then they kind of lose it when they maybe get in their teens or whatever. Some people keep it, and they're maybe psychic or whatever. So there was that aspect to it, and he was saying that to do with kind of trauma and stuff like that as well. So Jesse Mike was not really pressed him on that enough, because there was like some kind of intimation that kids were involved in regards to potentially being tested on or looked at for all this type of kind of program, and it just opens up a good number of rabbit holes in my head. You know what I mean? But I'll let you guys kind of interject if you want.
I mean, the Herrera stuff, I picked up on that because Herrera was a whistleblower, and a lot of people have dismissed him, mainly because he was sensationalist claims around drug smuggling and human trafficking. Everybody thought, oh, here we go. Because it sounded a bit like the grey end of the sort of weird and wonderful whistleblowers who haven't been very well vetted. So while he sounded a bit credible, Herrera, he was a bit dismissed. But Jake Barber, as you were saying there, Chris, he sort of he gave him a lot of credibility, because he actually explained there were the boxes, but they were, and there was a bit about it, but there was actually human tech sort of with NHI stuff as well. And the boxes were actually sort of workstations for these psionic assets. I think it was in Indonesia. So he sort of explained it, and it gave Herrera a lot of credibility. So it was really, really... so I thought it was pretty good. I mean, basically, he was part of that crash retrieval team, which you've heard about from Chris Sharp. You know how the CIA have these crash retrieval teams. And he seemed to be more of a private sector team working for Lockheed Martin or whoever. He didn't quite say, I don't think it was Lockheed Martin. It was another one. And he was actually a helicopter pilot picking up some of these assets. One was the egg shape, and one was what he called an 8-gon. And that 8-gon, apparently, he had sort of psychic contact with it when he picked it up. Either there was something inside it or the craft itself was conscious. But you're quite right, Chris. It opened up a whole sort of can of worms. Oh, not can of worms, just about the psychic link. And it brought that to the fore, because a lot of it had been dismissed again because of the grey link with C5, you know, summoning things and all the rest of it. But he sort of brought in because he said there were actual teams assigned using Sonic Link, special forces teams, but would load these craft in, and according to him, they'd sort of shoot them down then, you know, with whatever the pulse weapons they've got, or whatever they've got, apparently a weapon that'll bring it down. He's not saying he's going to do that now. He was just alluding to the fact that there's loads of questions about, well, why would they do that? You'd think they'd fall for it once, but you wouldn't think they'd fall for it after that, would you? But so there was quite a lot of stuff come out, but what it did sort of go on about, there's the private sector involved. There were these crash teams. The US government were well involved in it, you know, and of course, this Sonic Link wasn't a peripheral thing anymore or a weird thing. It was actually quite central to it, which if you listen to the main narrative over the decades, we sort of have heard that, but it sounds so weird, it's tended to be dismissed. And again, clearly there's links to the sort of broader paranormal themes and consciousness themes. Again, so it really sort of kicked things off, but in a way nobody predicted, I think. That was the thing for me with Jake Barber. And there was a bit of glitz to it and a bit of it thinking, is it a bit weird, this? Is it too good to be true? Is it a bit too dreary? But equally, he seems to have quite a bit of credibility as well. It was odd, you know what I mean? It was good, but it was odd. And I think the jury's still out in some ways, but I think it's less so now. Gary Nolan seems to be on board. They're doing some stuff. They've released one video. They've released another one coming out on the 7th of April. So when's that? I think that's Monday, is it? Or sometime soon anyway. Or Tuesday. And that's going to be where apparently he's filmed 9 different shapes of craft. Gary Nolan's been on saying who's been working with, but he's verified it all, but he said he's seen the methodology is pretty good. He's got Matthew Pines, who's another talking head of the community, who's doing the methodology, is their spokesperson. So whatever he's doing seems to be adding to credibility. So, it's very interesting. Yeah, so I think, I think what Chris is saying there was really, really good. It's opened a lot of things up and taking us down a bit of a different route as well.
I think as well when you look at the history of obviously psychic phenomena in the government, it's not as if it's a new thing. You know what I mean? You've had like Project Grill Flame and you've had Project Stargate, and I wouldn't believe they just ended. You know what I mean? Back in the day when you had like Joe McGonigal and loads of other people with remote viewing programs, and you go back and look at it as well when you had like Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ and stuff like that working in SRI in regards to the remote viewing program, and then you had other people who were basically working on the other side of it in the CIA. Like you had, what's their name again? Can't mind the guys.
MK Ultra?
No, not the MK Ultra side of it. I'm trying to think of the professor who knows Gary Nolan, and it's kind of like was his Kit Green. So
yeah.
Kit Green was at this roughly about the same time as Hal Puthoff. Hal Puthoff went into the private industry and he worked like SRI and stuff like that, although still subcontracted for the government and stuff. And Kit Green went the CIA route, and they were all into neurology and stuff like that. So Kit Green's connected to Gary Nolan, and he's supposed to be well into the whole topic in regard to like the whole conscious aspect to it, the neurological aspect to it, and right embedded in it. You know what I mean? When I was talking to Jim Segala no long ago, when he was working in Uinta Basin, he was putting all these sensors in Uinta Basin to try and pick up the phenomena and loads of different varied sensors and record blogs of people who were experiencers. He was working for Hal Puthoff and Kit Green. You know what I mean? So he's still involved in it. And then there was another guy, Skip Altwater, he was overseeing the SRI kind of project and stuff like that. There's a good documentary about him and Sean Ryan. He's quite an interesting guy as well, but he was the one that signed the checks off, basically. So there's a good history of that there. But what caught me the most with it, because it wasn't just the whole kind of thing with the Psionics, because we've heard it before. We've heard it obviously with the CE5 with Greer, and it's in a lot of different things with paranormal phenomena, with people connecting to things and all that kind of stuff. So if you believe in this kind of phenomenon as a whole, it's not hard to make a jump to think that people are developing it and putting into some use to actually pull something in. But the whole kind of thing with the kids caught me, because I was kind of thinking, well, you've had claims in the past, and I'm not saying they're true, you've claims in the past of people getting tested on in regards to like the gifted program, which Jake Barber brought up, which is a program in America where like kids were like went through some crazy different tests and stuff like that, and it was like almost like they were looking for something. And I can't remember what the acronym stands for, gifted, but it was a thing for it. So people in high schools and stuff like that were getting pulled into this program, and they've done a number of tests, and then it was maybe to highlight something. So that's one aspect to it. But then you had also things with people having claims where things like Camp Hero and the Montauk Project, and you had if it was true or not. But there's stories of people saying they had a number of tests put on them, and then there were they could describe inside like the houses and that. It was like Camp Hero, where the Montauk Project was supposed to reported that happened, and things like that. So you wonder if some of these stories are true in regards to like kids being involved or kids being tested, which I find interesting. You know what I mean? Just because it's like Danny Sheehan recently said as well in an interview. I actually tried to find it again just for this, and I couldn't find it. But it's in one of his recent interviews. He says one thing he did say, because Jake Barber brought it up, but never delved into it too much, and he wasn't pressed on it enough. And Danny Sheehan says it's a travesty when people find out about the kids that have been tested on to support this happening.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting because, I mean, you've basically got two strands there, haven't you, stretching back over time. You've got the thing about intelligence gathering and using, and it's in that loose threads as well. They use the remote views and all the rest of it to get intelligence on the craft because they didn't want to talk to them directly, you know, the NHI. Then you've got the thing about flying the things as well. And there's that link. So there's the two strands there about actively trying to use the tech and also trying to find out about the tech through other means. And also the baiting theme come out in that loose threads. And that was from the 60s and 70s and John Alexander and all the rest of it. And on the young kids thing, that's in Secret Machines as well, that thing about the kids being tested. There's a biography, I can't remember the guy's name, that's going to come out about, you know, they're all vying for the book rights of doing these young and gifted, I can't remember, Gifted and something it's called, the program, I can't remember myself. But that's really interesting, that, Chris, that those two, so it's always been a prize thing bubbling under the surface of the UFO topic. And it's often said in some of them that without the psi element, if you're not thinking about consciousness, you don't really understand the nature of the phenomenon. And so it's a very interesting connection.
It's very, so I've just been, while you've been talking about all of that, and like the other day I Googled the term psionics just to see what it meant, because obviously it's got a meaning somewhere, and it's taken from like the 50s and 60s science fiction type era about telekinesis, telepathy and all that kind of stuff. And then you just mentioned about CE5, and then you mentioned about the kids being tested on, or using kids as testing subjects. And we spoke to somebody not long ago, and her sort of story and experience now at the time was completely out there. Yeah. The Grey Mouse, this lady goes by the name of the Grey Mouse, and her story of her experience, not saying I'm on board completely with it, but it mirrors exactly what you've just been talking about, 3-letter agencies testing kids on telekinesis, remote viewing, all that kind of stuff. So I'm just thinking, was what she was saying entirely made up? Nope. Some of it, if you've listened to the episode, is quite a crazy listen, but then some of it is exactly what you've just been describing. And that whole link between UFOs and the paranormal is something that we've discussed over the last few years, but it's really mad that it all seems to now become sort of into the media and a bit more public, and people are talking about it, and it just seems insane to me.
When you look at the thing to do with like the kids' involvement here, right? If for example, if that was a thing where they found out that kids were more susceptible to either contacting or having psychic abilities and whatever, right? Let's say that was the case, right? We're just surmising that, but we're not just surmising that because Jake Barber brought it up. It's been, Danny Sheehan seems to know something about it as well. And there's a lot of other kind of stuff, right? So, and there's like stuff threaded through the history we just spoke about. There's other stuff though. I mean, it opened up so much rabbit holes for me. And I delved down it a wee bit. I mean, and I haven't had in the past anyway. And there was another thing. So there was the MK Ultra thing, right? See, when the MK Ultra thing, there was a lot of stuff to do with that as well in regards to they were in, it ties into even stuff as well, with potentially ties into stuff. It's funny, at the same time with the Kai Dickens podcast came out on the telepathy tapes in regards to the autistic kids and that having psychic abilities and be able to actually be telepathic. And it was like they were doing tests and they were 100% telepathic. There's going to be, it's really, if you've not listened to the podcast, a really good podcast, came out around about the same time. And it's all about like autistic kids having psychic abilities. It was interesting as well because Gary Nolan had mentioned something about something about the autistic kids a good while ago. about obviously like the brain, something to do with the brain when obviously they're doing some scans and stuff like that. But I think he just used it as like maybe an analogy or something, but it was interesting he used that as an analogy. But when Kai Dickens, it was a documentary maker, and there was this professor at, I think it was at Stanford or Harvard or whatever, and they were doing this study in these kids who basically were 100% telepathic. There were loads of them, and it was almost like they could basically leave their body and go to this place and communicate, a place called the Hill. They called it the Hill. But they could also, they'd done loads of tests where they'd be in one room and somebody be in another, and they would ask them like a question, an equation or a sum, and then they'd be able to get it. And they'd done loads of different tests so they could understand that it wasn't getting, it wasn't a con or anything, it wasn't a scam, or they weren't seeing anything. So it was done that much. Even when you look at the remote viewing program with that, I mean, that wasn't 100% accurate. I mean, the accuracy of the remote viewing program is somewhere between like 60 to 80%. But when you look at, even if it was up to 80%, but that's what it's going to say they got to. But when you look at that Kai Dickens thing, when you went through like all the different stories, and I think they're going to make a visual documentary. It was basically like 100% accurate for the psychic kind of ability, and it wasn't just telepathy. It was like the usual telepathy was like a link to a certain person, like their mother or dad, and they could know what they were thinking, and they could basically relay it, stuff like that, whatever it was. But it went on to other things as well. They could see people, so they could see like dead people. I mean, air quotes, right? I see dead people. But it was like they could see that as well, or they could see entities and other stuff. So it was like all that linkage in there. So that was one aspect to that. But it was interesting, I found that when the CIA were doing MK Ultra, there was a lot of suspicion at the time of them doing tests elsewhere, not just what they were doing with MK Ultra, but you actually kind of seen there was stuff where it purported they were in psychiatric hospitals and stuff like that, and they were in even like the Haight-Ashbury clinic, with things to do with like Charlie Manson and all that kind of stuff as well. There was like loads of stuff linked to that, and even up to 2015, there was people suggesting there was like actually some things happening like internationally as well. And in Scotland, there was in Scotland, it was brought up in Holyrood in one of the inquiry, in like a child abuse inquiry at one of the places somebody brought it up, and they actually said there was like some potential involvement with the MK Ultra and CIA. The interesting thing was one of the founders of the whole kind of MK Ultra kind of thing. It was a Scottish guy, a Scottish professor. I mean, it basically he worked there and ended up working in Canada. Anyway, I know that's a bit of a tangent, right? But I was kind of thinking back, how did they find these kids, or how were they looking for these kids? And there was another kind of rabbit hole I kind of found as well. Sorry if I'm hogging this wee bit, but I'll just kind of get the story out and let you know, right? So there's another thing called the Finders, if you know what the Finders are. So the Finders was supposed to be like a cult type group, right? And they were gone through maybe 60s, 70s, or 70s, 80s, 90s and beyond or whatever, right? But the Finders, 1987, there was like about 4 or 5 dishevelled kids at a kind of play park. And there was basically a couple of gentlemen with them with suits on, and a few people phoned the police. And then, so what it was, these guys had these kids. The kids were like basically a bit dirty. They were like had like insect bites in them, stuff like that. There's one they looked at a bit unkempt, but the guys had suits and that on. So they ended up at these guys were transporting the kids to like some special school in Mexico. So the police pulled them in. They actually found they were part of this cult called the Finders. And the Finders were started, basically, to go back, so they went back and they raided some places that were attached to it. And they found a lot of different kind of paraphernalia. There was paraphernalia in regards to stuff like the occult nature, ritualistic stuff. Seen videos of like ritualistic stuff, like them slaughtering goats and stuff like that, wearing white and everything. And they just said it was to do with anatomy and stuff like that, right? But the interesting thing with the Finders is they were supposed to be international. Right, the guy that started them was a guy called Marion Petty, and he was basically was a master sergeant in the Air Force. You can't find a lot on the guy, but it had links to the intelligence agencies. And the Finders at that time. So you're talking about the 80s. They had like the first type of emails that you could send out, and that they had that. You know what I mean? So they basically were contacting other different kind of groups to basically shut stuff down. And when another place got raided with the customs agents, they found like mind control stuff. They found stuff on basically a lot of how to evade police, how to traffic and all that kind of stuff. Loads and loads of stuff. And it all got covered up and shut down. And then they were purported to have links to the CIA, and then internationally. And this guy was like supposed to have had a lot of links to intelligence agencies. And when you look at, there's actually, you can go in now, there's volumes on this on the FBI files. Like you can go in and look at them. There's like volumes in the Finder. So when you read the documents, it's telling them they're definitely linked to like the CIA or something like that as well. And what their message was, like the cult they were supposed to be in, they weren't a cult. They said they were actually, it was like they were a kind of society that was based on a different way of living, futurism and technology. Futurism and technology, that's what we're involved in. And it was interesting though that there was things about like trafficking kids and all that kind of stuff. It was just totally mad, but it totally covered up, and they were definitely linked to like the CIA and stuff like that. As I said, you can go in and look at the documents on that, but I'm just thinking maybe it's away in a tangent, another kind of rabbit hole, but I'm thinking maybe this is something to do with the intelligence agencies or whatever else back then to actually find something or to try and, don't know. You never know. I mean, but it's interesting when you look into them and you tie all this together. I basically see that. You look at the telepathy tapes, obviously with the psionic stuff, you've got like the stuff with kids, put that in a big melting pot, you know what I mean? Come out with this.
I think, no, go on, Ash, what are you going to say, mate? Sorry.
No, go on. Mine's kind of a side point, so yeah, no, carry on.
Well, I mean, I was just going to say the big thing, I mean, the big link, I mean, some of these things, I heard that woman you had on and I thought, it was that crazy, I thought, I can't be doing with this. But I kept listening because I knew from other stuff, some things I knew about that I had heard, and other things were just really weird, and they had 20 and back. And it seemed to me a mixture of sort of fantasy stuff I'd heard and actual some other stuff. And like some of the things you were talking about there, Chris, you can hear echoes of Q stuff and really weird stuff, but also stuff you do know, and you wonder how much is sort of mixed together. But the bottom line is, I remember you and Greg talking about 3-4 years ago about why is UAP and how does it compare to the paranormal? And essentially, a lot of the paranormal things are like rhetorical points. You can't really get much further than what is a ghost, what's life after death, you know, and a few other things. What is consciousness? They end up being, they're almost rabbit holes by definition. However, this Kai Dixon stuff and all the rest of it, it's starting to show that reality may be a bit different, because if consciousness isn't just in your mind, it's not a chemical thing. It may exist on its own and you can project it. And a lot of all these other and maybe you can then manipulate reality, and maybe the science that these NHA stuff is based on, and some of the other paranormal stuff or whatever it is, are just manifestations of a broader sort of reality and manipulation that we don't see. And maybe that's what's coming out, because I think one of the things about this Psionics thing with Jake Barber and some of the stuff that's coming out is there's more connections now coming forward, and that everybody in the UAP field has picked up on that Kai Dickens thing because of that consciousness link and what it implies in terms of the nature of reality and all the rest of it. And while you obviously get, you know, the CIA's linked to everything, but it is nonetheless, you do wonder what the kernel of truth, because they obviously are pursuing these things. They're obviously identifying some of the skills these kids have got. So it's very hard to know where reality ends and fantasy begins and where people are embroidering. But nonetheless, I can see the broader paranormal field, some of those tendrils coming out and linking up a little bit more. So, yeah, I think it's all very, and that's why that Psionics, I think, has touched a nerve and went in the direction we weren't quite expecting to go. So very, very interesting. We can move it on a little bit after that if you want. But anyway, go on. What does anybody else think?
I was just going to say, like, the stuff with the kids is like, it kind of is a complete different direction. Kind of what you just said there, Dave, about it's not what we kind of expected to sort of be coming out. And I guess, is that something that, if more was to come out about that, kids being taken or experimented on, stuff like this, where mainstream may wake up a bit more to it, thinking, like, I'm not going to take my kids, not American to like as well, being a bit, our kids, that type of stuff, may make a bit more noise, maybe, in the mainstream. And also the whole psionics thing, it's like you both said, it's kind of always been there in the UFO field, but always kind of obviously kept to the woo-woo side. It's kind of been ignored. Stephen Gray kind of outcast, I guess, for quite a while now with what he's been doing. It's kind of come up, and even the word psionics. Greg talked about it. I was kind of what Greg did, kind of like what that even means, and psychonic acids and stuff. So I guess it's sort of took a turn. This sort of ufology sort of took that move from being like sort of solid objects and crafts, when it sort of started using UAP a bit more, and then that became a anomalous phenomenon rather than aerial. So it's kind of following that trend of we're moving further and further away from it being a craft in the sky to something we don't know what it is. It's something more spiritual. It's more consciousness rather than something that's in our physical world. And I guess is it still the same story that's just developing? Is Jake Barber just that extra person that's always been there as part of the plan to kind of move it along, and this is just the next step to whatever it is? Is it just the next cog in the kind of disclosure wheel as we go towards the next, like I say, the next sort of moment, as it's just going further along the same trail, if you know what I mean?
And yeah, so just on the back of that as well, when you were talking about C5, Chris, and I know me and Ash have done some C5 stuff and all that kind of almost like calling out, which is what we do in the paranormal. We call out for spirits to communicate with us, and the whole C5 thing is around that. It actually goes back, and bear with me on this, that I've been a big forgot what I was going to say there. I got into David Icke many years ago. Bear with me on this. He's very much around the consciousness of reptilians, which is obviously not what we're talking about here, but around the whole C5 and connecting. He actually had a Zulu shaman back in the early days of his studies called Credo Mutua, and he used to summon UFOs, and he was getting lots of flack about that they would just go out and essentially summon UFOs. And now here we are, like 25, 30 years later, and it's mainstream media talking about the fact that these kids are being used for psychic ability testing, the telepathy, that documentary around the kids with the telepathy, and also C5 and calling out all of the UFOs and summoning them. So I just wonder if some of the stuff that he was saying, as batshit crazy as some of it is, and it definitely is, some of his stuff is definitely on the now, ahead of his time. And he was cut off from the mainstream because of those sort of views. So it's just interesting that it all sort of has come around full circle, and we're talking about stuff that maybe 10, 15 years ago we'd have been shut out of the mainstream for this. So it's weird that they start to push this sort of paranormal aspect of UAPs now, which is great, obviously, and it's something that we've all been talking about. But it's just very interesting to see how the fringe stuff has now become mainstream.
It's a bit like the bloke who you might not like the person who buys you the pint, but the pint you get's all right. In that, so you might not like Icke's analysis or some of the people and some of the things they do say, but some of the kernel of what they're saying and what's happened and what they report may well be relevant. That's just to your point in a different way, I suppose, Greggy. I've noticed that as well, and you've got to try and separate the sort of person, because a lot of the issues with Icke is where he takes it and where he goes, and but I recognise stuff listening to him, but I thought, I've heard that elsewhere. And a lot of these people, and that shaman stuff, again, with Barbara, it don't quite sound so weird. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that's the sort of, that you're right, it is coming, it's just where it fits and how useful it is. I think the other thing with this is where you cut it off and go forward, because where do you go down the rabbit hole to, where it becomes a bit useless, or at what point do you jump off and go to the next thing that takes you forward? That's the other tricky navigating point, I think. If we're on the UAP front, anyway, I realise if we're going broader, there might be broader things. But yeah, very, very good. Sorry, would you guys want to come in there? Because I was we can move on to some of the other UAP stuff just in terms of where we are as well. But I think it's pretty interesting this as we're going.
I was just going to add, in regards to just what you said there about the reptilian stuff, because I know obviously David Icke had talked a bit about that in the past, and it wasn't really, obviously the film, he says don't mention the reptilians. But more than quite recently, after like 2017, John Ramirez done quite an interesting presentation. John Ramirez was like career long life CIA guy, quite high up, and experiencer. And he done you can get it online, basically done a presentation on quite a lot of different TV, like the different departments and the symbolism, some of the signs in the departments and that. And there's quite a lot of reptilian type symbolism and quite a lot of different like US kind of badges and all that kind of stuff. And he's talking about all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that stuck in my mind, reptilian wise and stuff like that, present day stuff, and he was spoken to by Lou Elizondo and stuff like that, but it wasn't put in identified when he had that on. It was Terry Lovelace. So Terry Lovelace, if you read his first book and his second book, he never added it in the first book because he thought it was too out there to put in, and he just didn't think people would have, like, obviously the story in itself anyway is out there to people who aren't into the topic. But what he said in the second book, where that he didn't add in the first one, was the kind of hybrid being that he'd been in communication with over the years since he was young, had basically said to him that they basically were on the moon and stuff like that, and they were there with their hosts, right? As in, like, and they said that if he pressed too much about what he was doing, that his government would probably have something to do about it, as in, like, maybe do away with him or something like that. But she also said that there was a reptilian race, that lived on Earth and inside the moon, and it was all to do with taking humans, a certain amount of humans and animals and stuff like that. And he never added it in the first book, so I thought it just was like too crazy. And one of the questions I asked him when I spoke to him, I didn't relay that part of it, because I think he found it quite uncomfortable to maybe talk about. And I just said to him, I said, when you spoke to that entity, do you think they lied to you? And he said, he goes, no, I don't think so. He said, I'd be quite aggrieved if she had, because I had this kind of connection with them and stuff like that. So I kind of found that an interesting in regards to, like, present day kind of mention to the reptilians again. And then just a wee touch on, for I kind of stop talking about this, but the thing with the kids and thing as well, it's been interesting as well, because there's been stories through time. I'm not talking about a large span of time, but stories through time of people whose parents were in the military as well, and they purported that basically said, oh, we were maybe in some kind of program when we were younger and stuff like that, or brought to somewhere younger, or tested when we were younger. And it's interesting as well. You go back and you watch the X-Files. And that happened in the X-Files quite a lot, like with people who were in the State Department and that. And it's really interesting telling you go back and watch the X-Files again with some of the stuff through that, you know what I mean, compared to what you maybe found out now, if it is true and all that kind of stuff. So totally interesting side.
That's what I was alluding to earlier with that Bowen Secret Machines with Tom DeLonge and that biography that's coming out. That's a common thing, but these kids are taken out and young and they trained up because of their sort of abilities, and that is a common thing. Another interesting thing on the reptilians is a thing by Chris Ramsey on Area 52, very good YouTube thing, the Laerta Chronicles, which he's talking to apparently a reptilian subterranean race, bit of a cryptoterrestrial thing about what they've been. So there's a lot of that about, and I think, as John Ramirez himself said, what is it? Hold it lightly, so you can take it on board and put it into your sort of smorgasbord, as it were, without having to go the whole 9 yards, because I've heard some of the reptilian stuff was quite interesting, and some of it people are clearly gone off well, in my view, they've gone off the deep end, but you shouldn't dismiss it. You know, there's quite a bit. And coming back to where we were talking about with the consciousness, remember, Greg, when we were talking about cryptoterrestrials some time ago, I mentioned slide 9, which they mentioned about what the NHI were doing. Yeah. And they had this ability to sort of walk through walls, to use psychic ability to control people, to manipulate matter, reality. All the things we've just been talking about there was attributed to the phenomena. And so, again, you've got that connection in quite a nuts and bolts way that was being said to the Joint Chiefs of Staff by, Chris Mellon back in 2018-19. So there is part of the phenomenon that we see, these sort of things. And, I remember saying to somebody years ago, oh, this reptilian is a load of rubbish. And he knew quite a bit about it, and he was talking to me about the old myths. And so I realised there's a bit more to it then. That was a few years ago now. But again, you've got to watch when you mention it, because people's eyes sort of fall out of their head, don't they? And there is a lot of weirdness that sort of spoiled it, really. Not spoiled it, but put people off. But I think that thing on Area 52 about the Earthquake was really, really interesting. And that was done in an interview in the 80s with somebody in Sweden. Really, really good. Anyway, so any more there?
So it's interesting that, like I said, a few years ago, we wouldn't have been able to talk about this without sort of being essentially cancelled from the mainstream. But when the mainstream talk about it and give that little bit, it's okay for us to talk about it again. It's almost like this subject is coming to light, like the UAP thing. The fact that they come out and said the UAPs are real and they got all these videos and whatnot, and it's congressional. It then means that, actually, the wider community can have more of a mainstream conversation about it. Whereas we've just been talking about psychic kids being used in experiments, summoning UFOs, reptilians, psionics, and probably even just before Christmas, that conversation you wouldn't have been able to have without somebody going, that's all bullshit. What you're talking about, that's the stuff of the David Icke type person. So it's weird that the narrative is being pushed and we're able to talk about stuff that we weren't able to talk about before. But
just to catch us up a little bit, what happened was, remember I was saying Trump was the great hope, as it were, and the minute he got in on day one, he said, I'll sort the drones out. He said, on day one, I'll sort it out. And on day 3 or 4, he said it was all hobbyists in the FAA. Everybody went mad, said, load of rubbish. How can you justify that? Lots of different people didn't stack up. I'm not saying, basically, people thought there was a lot more to it. But the point about that was it led a lot of people to think Trump wasn't very serious about the UAP thing. And there was wider fears about disclosure going on. I think people weren't sure whether Trump had sort of cooled on the UAP, but there was no sort of presidential order declassifying UAP as well. And they had a lot of high hopes around all the different people who he brought into the regime, and it didn't seem to happen. So that sort of signaled that maybe the Trump regime was going elsewhere. However, they did set up this oversight conspiracy committee, as it were. I think it's called the Task Force on Classification of Federal Secrets. And just from my view, everything with the Trump regime is a bit of a parody. They can't do anything without it becoming some sort of, So anyway, they threw in not just UAPs, they threw in JFK, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, 9/11, COVID-19, Epstein, and all the rest of it. But nonetheless, UAP is part of that. And I think it's Rep Lunar who's leading it with Tim Burchett, the old UAP caucus anyway. And some people were a bit depressed because it was sort of seen it as diluted, but other people were a bit more optimistic about that because if we uncover a couple of things, it may lead to a bit of a spin-off. So that was sort of seen as a bit of a hope. Recently, Eric Burlison, who was on that committee, has appointed David Grush, who you will remember, as a special advisor. Now, he knows what questions to ask, because the frustration to them, they didn't know what questions to ask. when they were getting these people in a skiff. So David Crush can help that. And apparently that brings back his classification, his ability to say stuff, because he's part of the congressional staffing team. So that's really interesting. And apparently Leo Alexander, Chris Mellon, Arrow and Crush themselves will be in a skiff, a secret compartmented intelligence facility, where they all go in. It's sort of secret. You can talk about classified stuff. So that's interesting. So that's something that may yield fruit. But as I say, in typical Trump regime fashion, it seems to have been sort of popularized. I don't know what the word is. It's diluted. But I think the other thing about Trump for me is talking to a lot of people who would know, not that I know loads, but I knew a few people. People were absolutely convinced when Trump got in something was going to happen. People who would know. And so people were getting ready, thinking, right, this is going to happen now. There was a lot of open talk going on. Hal Puthoff was on this on NASA, and I think it was the National Science Foundation podcast. People from DARPA and NASA talking about some of the recovered tech and some of these scientific principles. The idea, as I say, the deep state, Trump was going to throw open the deep state. Lou Alexander was coming as a UFO czar. Rubio was put in charge of the National Archives, which is key to, the UFO face secrecy. Tulsi Gabbard, she was mentioned it in a hearing, an approval hearing for the Director of National Intelligence. Tim Gallaudet, the Admiral, was called in to talk to the White House. But it seems progress has sort of stalled. And what I was saying earlier, people are wondering if the Trump regime's backed off because the IC have said, hey, you do know all those drones are all exotic tech and UAPs, so you better keep quiet because you ain't going to be making much great again if it seems like you can't control the skies. So he's just gone, right, we'll leave that. Maybe you got the tech bros who want to make money on it, so he's, and he likes a bit of money, doesn't he? Or whether everything's just a bit too busy and chaotic. So there could sort of be that, really. And the other question with the Trump regime, because of the way they go, are they actually capable, because of this alternative facts thing, of doing a sort of forensic investigation of what comes out of it or taking it elsewhere? Because it may, the irony maybe, the only regime that's crazy enough to break this open is the only one that isn't capable of properly analysing it. Do you see what I mean? So there's all that going on. And that's why I'm saying there was massive hope after Christmas, but with the Trump regime, it sort of put a spanner in the works and it hasn't gone as people say. And I just want to go on to one more thing, and I promise I'll shut up then. Because we're now seeing quite a lot of soul searching in the community. Some are saying the strategies now is we should go back to the big whistleblower thing to blow it open. If they're not going to blow things open, let's wheel a few whistleblowers out and go down the congressional route and just keep chipping away. But we've got another prong, because I think there's a two-pronged strategy, the Jake Barber route, and people are going for the DIY disclosure effectively, like Jake Barber, we can do it ourselves, we'll get the proof. So there's that side of it now. Then you've got other people, community figures, who seem to be getting very disenchanted with it now and saying, I'm sick of all this disclosure, nothing's going to happen, we've got to make it happen. And also, I think, because of that, some areas of the mainstream community, we've just been talking about this, didn't really want to get into, and now coming to the fore, more abduction stuff, more remote viewing, more stuff is actually coming to the fore what was previously. And as I say, I think that's a bigger, like we were talking about earlier, that's a bigger bridge to the paranormal. And I wonder, is that good? Are we losing focus? But I also think there's a life cycle of people who come into it in 2017. Are they getting is that cycle of 10 years or 8 years finishing people off now and they're getting a bit sick of it? Do they need yet more revelations? Because we're not seeing more, we're just seeing a splurge of revelations, but nobody's taking it seriously. And so there's that. Sol's still at it. Danny Shane's talking a lot about stuff. He mentioned the reptilians as well, funnily enough. There's also the fears about, as I say, the tech bros. So I think where we are is the community, and I've done a bit of a whistle-stop tour there, seems a little bit becalmed, and they're waiting for what's going to happen. It's a bit rudderless. There's a few best of times, worst of times, things are happening, but we're not quite sure what's going to happen next. And that's sort of where we are. And as I say, because of what the Trump dog hasn't barked, we're at a bit of a crossroads really. What's going to go on? So we've got interesting things, yet we've got a bit of desperation and people saying, "Oh, forget about this. I'll just plough my own furrow." So that's sort of where we are. I've got a couple more things, but I don't know what you think about that, because I also think we're at a bit of a tipping point, which I'll come to in a minute. In fact, I've just come to now to that, because that'll finish it off nicely, actually. Because I think, ironically, in terms of the revelations we got, we're further than we've ever been. You know, in terms of revelations, we've got people are definitely saying there's a legacy crash retrieval program. We've seen a lot of evidence, a lot of people talking about that. It's got a lot of credibility. Crash retrieval team. We're hearing the nuclear secrets are stored in the presidential office, presidential emergency action directives. So that keeps it out of congressional oversight. So we are quite far actually down the road, and we've got quite a good picture of what's happening in many ways. So in many ways, it wouldn't take much to flip the switch, yet we've got this sense of despondency. So that's sort of, we're teetering on the edge, and it just depends whether we'll just fall off the edge or we'll go somewhere useful. So sorry, I've stopped now.
I mean, the Trump thing's a bit weird, because it's kind of like all the stuff that's been going on and all the bad that's coming out. It's like UFOs, in terms of like importance, is so far down kind of the order. It's like there's much more important things that is wrong that's coming out of that regime. It's probably not like what I mean. No, I don't think anyone could have expected kind of how bad it's been. Just the way he just came out, all guns blazing, and just wiped all this stuff. It's just absolutely crazy. So it's kind of like, obviously being in the UFO topic as we are, it's kind of like it's almost like selfish to concentrate on this bit when it's kind of not important in the grand scheme of things. So it is kind of weird. But then, like I said, there's that committee that's created with Luna and stuff. So it's like it is there, but it's not. It's a really weird kind of thing to look back on. And like I say about the DIY stuff, and obviously Jake Barr with Skywatch, and Nolan and Pines involved in that with that Skywatch program. It is really, like I say, a lot up in the air. Like I say, chaos is probably a good word, where it's all this new stuff's coming out. Which direction do we go in? Is it sort of feet on the ground, grassroots type of stuff we should go in, or the whistleblower way? Because Grush, I think, because there's that film that was shown, can't remember the name of it now, it's completely gone. No, my brain's got brain fog at the minute.
Age of Disclosure, Ash.
Yeah, that's the one. Again, that was like, this groundbreaking doc, but then people that have seen it or sort of been read into it have said it's nothing really new. A couple of things in there, but nothing new. So is the whistleblower going to be the same thing? If we go down that path, it's just going to be the same thing. These new revelations that end up being nothing, or do we need to go down the kind of getting the data without having to do it officially? We get it kind of the community or the people involved in the community, the ex-officials, the ex-intelligence officers do it their own way. So it's just, at the point, it's kind of made the point about Trump, really. It's kind of not big and like it's not important in the grand scheme of things, but it's just a really weird situation we're in. I don't think anyone could have really seen it, I guess, to be where we are right now.
I think Trump is, I mean, in regards to, he's admitted that he's not got a great interest in the topic. But at the same time, obviously, we starting this with Luna. I mean, I didn't have high hopes for it. I mean, I kind of thought this is not going to have any teeth. But now Grush is part of it. I mean, I kind of think maybe it will get a bit more kind of pressing. He knows where the bodies are buried. The bodies are buried. So hopefully it gets a bit of push on that. But I do see as well, I know we talk about the Barber stuff in regards to a DIY disclosure, but I mean, if you look back and you look at the Stars Academy, you'd probably put that as the same, but you know that he had advisors and stuff like that as well. I mean, I'm a great believer in the fact that that a lot of the intelligence agencies, there's like infighting between what's coming out and what's not coming out. And I do think that like people like Leo Elizondo's maybe had the okay to come out and do that. And I think Barber's probably the same. I think like maybe the whole kind of Barber process, obviously now it's getting funded by venture capitalists and stuff like that. And there is maybe a push to try and get it out internally. This is maybe like To the Stars 2.0. You know what I mean? Because the point is, To the Stars wasn't just about making documentaries. It was about actually trying to build craft and stuff like that as well, and technologies and things like that. The kibosh was put in that when basically Hillary didn't win the election, and then it all kind of got kiboshed. And I don't know if just Tom DeLong maybe talked too much during the process as well. I'm not really sure if that was a bit of it, but the Barber thing for me, I feel like it's got funding, it's got quite a lot of interesting people involved in it. They're looking at peer-reviewed studies to actually try and get it scientifically peer-reviewed, and they want to do all that, and then obviously look for disclosure. They've also changed the name now of Psionics on it to another different name. It's called
Neural meditation, I think, something like that.
Changed that name. But in regards to I think that's like, it's still maybe a part for the internal coming out, but maybe no part of the programme, if you know what I mean. Or being part of the programme, but then it's allowed to come out. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It's interesting, and I know what you're saying with the whole. There's too much going on in Trump land now. You know what I mean? You've got the war in Ukraine, Putin. You've got all the tariffs, everything else. It just seems so far down the list of stuff to get done. I mean, it's high priority for us, low priority for them. But all these people involved. I mean, it'd be interesting. I've not really heard much from the good advocates yet back in the past, talking much about it now. I mean, I've not really heard much about Luna talking about the whole UFO thing. I've not really heard much about, what's his name? The other congressman who was quite vocal about it.
Burchett.
Yeah, you maybe hear a wee snippet from him saying it's a swamp, it's a crock of shit, or whatever else, stuff like that, but you never really actually heard a good discussion about what he kind of thinks anymore. So that's kind of telling, but I don't know, we can still hope. The whole drones thing, as you said at the start, Dave. I mean that was just, it was a bit concerning, the fact that they just turned in and say it was swamp gas again, basically. You know what I mean?
Well, there's a CNN thing, wasn't there? Did you see the CNN thing recently? Earlier this month, CNN, all these ex-military guys, and saying we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
You know, directly, flatly contradicting it. So that's still hanging about, isn't it, as you say?
Yeah, it's still there. It's still going on, yeah. It's definitely still going on, the drone thing. You know what I mean? And that's the thing as well. And it wasn't even just this year. It was dating back to like 2022 or something, or 21. And multiple things like this as well. I mean, it's not just been like a recent thing. And then interesting thing as well, and amongst that, which we kind of didn't touch on, was the guy who, what's his name again? The special forces guy that blew up the Tesla truck outside one of the Trump hotels.
Yeah. And I can't remember his name either.
He was talking about basically like advanced technology, anti-gravific vehicles and stuff like that as well, and sent like a whole kind of email to Sean Ryan, a number of other kind of numerous places that would report it, and then kind of killed himself, kind of thing. And he was supposed to be maybe involved in that kind of circles that Jake Barber knew as well. So, quite interesting stuff.
One theory I heard about that was, and it's all speculation, but it was basically the Chinese had reverse engineered some exotic tech and put it on the drones, and they were the ones that was over what was overflying the US, which would get around all the logistical issues. Mm-hmm. And then there was obviously US stuff in the air, and that was what they couldn't admit to, and that was very close to what that bloke was saying in the Tesla. Now, it could all be complete cobblers, I do accept that, but it is interesting, that scenario, isn't it? Because if you think that would explain why the Biden administration just said, we don't know what it is, which sounded rubbish, and Trump probably come out and said, oh no, it's, said something ludicrous as well. Because there's too many weird factors. Some of it looks normal, some of it doesn't. And there's too much weird stuff there for it to, it's not easily explainable. And the nuclear connection, or the military deployment connection, but it does, Now, can you imagine that if China had reversed some tech and were flying it over to freak the Americans out or whatever? Imagine that actually gone, and they wouldn't say. So that's pretty weird. But just to come back to that DIY thing, that's sort of my term, and it's not meant to be as pejorative as maybe it sounds, because all I mean is people are doing it themselves now.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean.
No. But the point is, I was going to say was, there's a distinction, I think, in the field. There's been loads of people saying, "Oh, forget about the government. We'll just do it ourselves." That never works, because there's no credit. There's no, because they haven't got access to the stuff yet. People like Alexander and all that, they have got a connection. They've got a plan, so they were more best placed to make it happen. And there's a sort of conflict between the in the knows and the wanna knows, and I think there's been a conflict between two different factions. But interestingly, with Barber, he has got those connections and those links. So his form of do it yourself, as it were, may well work, because it's scientific method. You've got Nolan linked to this Salt and these entrepreneurs who might be sort of good guys rather than the dodgy ones, over Enigma. And so I agree with you, Chris. It's not to be dismissed, because I think if it's going to work, and if you are going to do it yourself, you've got to have some proper linkage and heft behind you. You can't just sort of throw your hands up in the air and dance off into the desert for 3 years and hope it'll all turn up right, So I think it's quite interesting that. It's a really good distinction I thought you were making there, was my point.
I mean, I think I did have high hopes as well for basically the Doge aspect of it, because I know the only issue with that is Elon Musk is stated that he doesn't believe there's anything there and all that kind of stuff, which I don't believe. But what I did think that with the way that the administration was going to start off when they came into power, but obviously with the Doge and looking for waste and all that, the Pentagons failed an audit for forever, basically. So I kind of thought that would have been a good bit for them to get their teeth into, and then maybe open up some of the kind of Pandora's boxes, what's kind of in there, you know what I mean? But he's kind of stated that he doesn't really believe it. So, I mean, that's kind of been poo-pooed for that. But I just kind of thought that was probably a better angle to try and break into it, rather than like Luna, for example, go the money trail, rather than go down try to chap doors Area 51 or whatever else. You know what I mean?
But you're right. I mean, I said that in November on the guy's show there, and I thought it's the only conspiracy if it's probably real. That's what, if you want to prove the deep state, the UAPs is the way to prove it. But in fact, he's got rid of all the Inspector General who would find it out. And they're not that Doge. It's a political thing, in my view. It isn't. They're not going for the deep state in the way they said. So I don't think they're interested in that. But I thought the same thing, and that's been the thing. It's not been what they said. It's something else. And I must admit, Ash, I'm watching. I'm watching this Trump stuff is so big, the change in the balance of military alignment and NATO, it's massive change, the tariffs, the economic threat. I'm finding I'm watching more political stuff than I am UAP stuff.
Yeah.
Which is, and I'm very interested in politics and history and all that, and as you know, but I found since 2017, I've really been following UAP stuff. I've followed it all my life, I suppose, but it's so mega. And it has such implications. It's almost, because the UAP stuff intrinsically has a lot of implications, doesn't it? But this is so big that it's almost, you don't know where to go. So anyway, I've sort of gone off on a bit of a tangent there. But I think it's going to be, it's just whether they're interested, I suppose. And as I say, we've got all these revelations. It's whether anybody's interested, whether the regime, what would happen. Because in any other regime, if it would have come forward, the committees would go forward and there'd be they'd go through and there'd be some process that would be followed that would be sort of forensic and logical. Well, I can't see it with this lot, can you? I mean, sorry, well, I might be wrong, but it it feels like that. It's very much sort of rabble-rousing and, sound bites. And so it's very, very, very odd. And you're right about the UAP documentary. I think the thing about that age of disclosure, it wasn't they were saying anything new. It was the caliber of people who were saying it. But and hopefully, if it comes out, then it might tip the scales, because they're all really significant. Some people haven't spoke head of the CIA, and it's if the needle moves with the right people, and that was always supposed to be the difference with that. But if the needle moving with the right people doesn't mean anything anymore, then so what? Do you know what I mean? That's to come to your point, and I do think that really all this NDA and documentaries, I don't know whether it's proved itself time and time again. It's not a good platform to get stuff out, because the NDA stop people talking, and by the time the story's out, it's sort of old news, or and so I wonder if the Dave Grush route and how he came out is the better way to do it. Not putting story in these documentaries maybe isn't that important. There's a final thing I was going to get into after people have come back on that, about Harold Malgrim and the CIA and the Kennedy stuff, and that maybe a good place to finish off about what's come out there, if we've got time, or what we like. Yeah? Have you got anything else, though, before I start? Because I've realised I've talked quite a bit there.
I was just going to say, in terms of the the DIY, or the kind of do it themselves with the sort of whistleblowers and stuff, it just needs to be better than videos of eggs. That's like, for me, it's like, we're here again. It's like, because people get tired of it. Like, genuinely, I use the term jaded, because you just know it's going to be nothing. And we sort of move past it's going to be another Corbell video or whatever, and it's going to be a load of nothing again. If we are going to sort of, like I say, go down that route, it's got to be something. It's got to start getting more substantial stuff. And like I say, it's not working with the docs, potentially. The videos we've had, there's been a couple of things in there, but on the whole, all these leaks and videos have pretty much turned out to be nothing much at all. Just kind of, if we are going to sort of take that next step, the evidence, I guess for lack of a better word, has got to be better, or it's just going to be the same thing over and over again. I'm just not going to get anywhere. I know it's tricky, but it's just, and stop the, I've got to say it again, but stop the hyping up. And just say, this is the stuff we've got. This is the video, rather than build it up, and then it makes it look worse when you look back at it. Because it's supposed to be this next, the most amazing thing. This is the evidence we've finally got it, blah blah blah, and then it's a video of that. What we talk about that video, but it just makes us look more like a laughing stock to other people. When this is what you've got. You got all these people coming forward, this leaked stuff, and this is what you're showing us. It's like, how can we move on from that? That's kind of with the Skywatch stuff or whatever. Maybe that's where it will see it, but yeah, we need to be better, I think, is probably the kind of the message I'm trying to get across.
Well, for once, Ash, I totally agree with you, mate. No, I think you're right. I mean, it's just not good enough, is it? While I get, there was no proof. He couldn't actually physically prove that was an NHI craft he picked up. He didn't know, because he didn't see what happened to it. So ultimately, at some point, and I think these videos will be interesting. That'll be the next test on the 7th. You know, they've got 9 things. But what's the corroborating evidence? And in fairness, they are trying to do that. But ultimately, if it's not officially corroborated by sources people trust, then you're nowhere again, are you? Who knows, you know? And so I agree with you. It's got to be better. It really has. Or it's got to be properly, efficiently, from some high-up person saying this is real. So I totally get that. Should we do this Harold Malgrim stuff, just the last bit, and see, because I think this moves us on quite nicely, you know, just at the end. Basically, I hope I'm saying his Malgrim. He was an advisor. He was important behind the scenes figure in the Cuban Missiles crisis, advised a number of presidents. Notably in the 60s, he stopped one of the generals whose name escapes me. I've been trying to remember his name all day. But anyway, he was like in Dr. Strangelove, a nuke all sort of general. He apparently stopped them launching calmed them all down in the Cuban Missile Crisis. But he basically, sadly, he died on February the 13th this year, but he made revelations about a high-ranking CIA official, I think it was a fellow called Richard Bissell, and he was tied to skunkworks and told them that the USA were in possession of non-human craft and all about the legacy program, so he told him that. And he also told the tale, which is about Kennedy. Partly when they did, I think it was called Bluegill Prime, they did this high-altitude nuclear blast and a UFO come fizzing out of it. You know, they downed it because that was monitoring the nuclear test they were doing. That was in 1962. Anyway, what happened then was Kennedy was told about it, and him and Johnson, the vice president at the time, flew to Los Alamos and were briefed on the UAP thing. Kennedy knew about the UAP thing definitely then. And shortly afterwards, because they were so worried about what had nearly come to the brink of war, you know, with the Cuban Missile Crisis, he reached out to Khrushchev about getting rid of nuclear weapons and doing joint space operations and sharing info on all the UAP. And apparently that was a bit of a link. There's a potential link, but not all of it, if you listen to Danny Sheehan, to his assassination, potentially. So there's a bit of a link there. But also, that Harold Milgram, just before he died, because he was connected to all of this, he started talking about massive post-war cover-up, been going on for years, artifacts kept at Wright-Patterson, talking about MJ-12 being a real thing. This guy is mega, mega credible, totally different order. And so with this person, and it's bad news that he died, and more bad news for him, I'm sure, but it's bad news. That is a big, that again confirms this story that's coming to place about this legacy program, this post-war cover-up. We've got possession of the craft. He also hinted, and as Barb did, about us maybe having reverse engineered some of the craft as well. And that comes back to the other revelations in the November hearings. You know, what is it, Immaculate Constellation? That was coming out of that. So he sort of confirmed this picture that he's emerging of this secret legacy program, but he's still fighting hard to keep secret. So I think, and he started to come out because he detected just before Trump, funnily enough, because he died, I think, in February, but the government were moving slowly towards disclosure now. They'd made that sort of decision because of the revelations. Now, maybe that's all stopped with Trump. I think he may well have done, you know. But that was very significant that somebody of his gravitas come out and confirmed all those things. Again, I'm not saying it's 100%, but he's of a different order in terms of him saying that, and he had no reason to say it. So that was a nice little bookend to where we got to that person coming out. It's been recently been talked about you know, the footage of this and he's done apparently an interview that he recorded just before he died with Jesse Michaels that hasn't been shown yet. I'd be interested to see what he says on that. So yeah, it's a very interesting. It's sort of water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. Or maybe I don't know. You've got a lot of water, but there's no, you haven't got a boat to sail in, I suppose, because with the conditions, the political conditions. Anyway, yeah, there you go. So I don't know what you guys think about that as a sort of possibly the direction we're going in, but so near yet so far type of thing.
Chris, do you want to add kind of what was spoken about? What Dave talking about?
I know what you mean. It's still so near so far. I mean, I don't know how much hope I've got for it in the future. I mean, I didn't follow the CIA documents when they came out. Been moving house and everything else, so as one thing I didn't get back into. But I have read about the whole connections with JFK and knowing this in the past, and then obviously that detonation that was DARPA that did that as well, wasn't it? Was that DARPA that did that detonation and stuff like that? Aye. So
yeah, it was Los Alamos, and the other one it's called Linda. It starts with an L. There's Los Alamos Labs, and the other one Lawrence Livermore. They were the two who were recording the explosion, and like you say, it was DARPA who I think were the ones who initiated it. I only know because I listened to it recently. That's why I know. So I'm not just remembered that out of nowhere. I would listen to it recently. So yeah, but it was just that thought of it been going back, and so I think, and I was thinking I was coming on tonight. I was thinking we have got quite a good picture now from Grush and a few other people. It's quite a consistent picture coming out, and we know it's probably been hidden through this because these presidential things, these PEDs, they're for national disasters and cataclysms, as I say. So they kept secret. That's why they're secret and they're under the presidents, because it's what happens if a meteor's about to hit or nuclear wars declare. It's by its nature, you don't want people to panic. So that's how they've sort of kept it secret there, out of congressional oversight. So we've got that picture. We've got a lot of people talking, yet it just doesn't seem to be. We can't seem to find a thing that's going to push it over the edge. And as I say, disinterest now is actually what's maybe Wolf Waters, because they're off with the fairies now, aren't they? Really, the Trump regime, they're off on some whole different war dance or whatever dance they're doing. And I don't think it's got UAP anywhere near it, to be honest with you. Particularly if, as we think, you can't very well make America great again if he can't even control his own skies, So very interesting.
It's interesting to see, like, in regards to like who the gatekeepers actually are. I know obviously like Cheney was rumoured and stuff like that, right? But who they are and why they're keeping it secret. And then I know obviously there's money attached to that because you've got like defence contractors and things like that involved in it as well. But they seem to be. I mean, when you go back to the DIA thing when they were trying to get the craft of Lockheed Martin, they seem to be kind of willing to actually pass it on. Then the Air Force can put the kibosh on it. But then it's just. But then you look at the stuff to the Stars Academy back in the day, and they had advisors like McCaslin and stuff like that were advisors to Tom DeLonge. So that was like part of the Air Force like trying to push this out. So it's like you look at all these different facets who are potentially trying to support or push it out. You've got obviously when Lou Elizondo and stuff like that, they were trying to do something to get it pushed out as well. And you're thinking, who is the actual gatekeepers of this? Is there maybe just multiples and they don't know? There's nobody in charge yet. I mean, that's been rumoured as well, that there's nobody actually in total charge of this programme. There's two different.
I don't believe there's nobody. I don't think it's a big ubiquitous.
I'm just putting that out as a potential.
What I mean is, I don't think it's either some clever conspiracy where it's all contrived this and it's some kabuki play. I don't think it's that. I think it's these factions fighting, but I do think there's definitely some iron control there that's being exercised deep in the security system. But what we don't know, Grush had mentioned they've been in contact with the NHI. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We also don't know if there's anything, the rumours of impending things, that we don't know the full trip story. And we don't know whether this faction is trying to push at this because they think there's something that should be discussed and people don't want it discussed. And it could be just as simple as power and people trying to cover up the misdeeds, but it could be something else as well. And so I think the whole dimension of what is the role of the NHI, if any, is the sort of big question, isn't it? And we don't know.
I find it interesting because a few times where there was obviously you had the whole aspect of the generals in the past saying didn't touch this subject because it's evil and stuff like that, or it's demons and it's this and it's that. And sometimes I think, is that just through because they're evangelistic, or is it actually because they know something, right? And then you look at the whole aspect of the whole kind of thing where I think at one point where you had Ross Coulthart and other ones like that were basically talking about there's some maybe an impending thing. I mean, and they talked about that as well as obviously, I'm not saying they believe that though, right? As well as Lou Elizondo, the main ones who put that kind of impending thing coming was John Ramirez to start off with the 2027 thing. He's basically leading one other podcast that there's like something coming here in 2027. And then you've got like the Chris Bledsoe thing, end of 2026, end of 2026, 27. He said there's like some event, and then Lou Elizondo's been asked about it. This intrigues me quite a lot, and I think about it a lot. And he's been asked a number of times about if he knows about an event, and he said, well, he knows of an event. It's no Apophis, but it's not his place to say what it is.
Yeah, Bigelow said it. A lot of remote viewers have said it. I mean, you don't know, dear, how much you don't. You don't know, but it is in the air, isn't it? You don't know. But the point is, it may well be. That might be the rumour, but the actual truth might be something a bit more prosaic. But that something will probably need to be discussed that they don't want to talk about. It's really because Lou he alluded to it very strongly, Lou, and he's backed off it a little bit since. But he did. I've listened to him a few times. It's not my place to say, and all the rest of it. He didn't sort of deny it, but equally, Well, Ramirez is an interesting guy anyway. But yeah, so yeah, it does intrigue me. It's intrigued me, and I normally dismiss this sort of stuff, and, I normally go, no, because I've heard it all before. But in this case, it just felt a bit different. But again, coming back to where we are, I think that's a quite important question you've asked, Chris. Who is in charge, and to what extent are they in charge, and to what extent are events in charge as well? That's a really interesting point. And to what extent is Trump thinking, I don't want to touch this with a barge pole, it's all too much, or whether he just doesn't care, And maybe we might be seeing, I've often described it like a boxing match between the forces of disclosure and non-disclosure. Maybe we're in a bit where it's the Empire Strikes Back again, do you know what I mean? And they're in the ascendancy, they've managed to nobble Trump, and it's their turn again, So, and it's this boxing match of disclosure that's going on. Interesting.
Yeah, all very interesting, fascinating topics. There's the knowledge shared by both of you is great. So thanks very much. It's hard to for Greg and I to add too much to what you guys talk about, but that's great, really is. So anything else anybody wants to add before we finish? Or is everyone good?
No, all good from me.
No, I'm fine. I think I've covered, give it a good area, and I love the Jake Barber thing and the broad thing of consciousness, and then how that I thought that was a really good connection and discussion route into it as well. And we ended up virtually in a similar place, interestingly. So I thought it was really interesting discussion.
Definitely. So yeah, thank you, Dave and Chris and Greg, as always. And everyone listening, let us know your thoughts. Where do you think disclosures are, and where do you think we're going? Let us know on the comments or on social media. And that's a bye from us, and we will see you all next time.
See ya.
Title music created by Steve Yarwood and Ambi Infinity. If you like the show, please follow us on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, X, and Instagram. And if you really like the show, please rate and review the show wherever you are listening. It really does help. See you next time, and until then, stay weird.